And now to discuss more on this, I have the Director General of the Lagos State Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Muda Yusuf, joining me via Skype. And also from Abuja, I have Senior Economist of SPM Professionals, Paul Alaje. Good to have you join us, gentlemen. Let's start with you, Paul. Looking at the figures that we've had from Moody's as well and the reason for the change, what do you make of that?
Well, the figures, the reports we've been getting directly from World Bank, and if you add the new reports that came yesterday evening to it, Moody's report, it calls for a lot of worry for Nigeria to have approximately additional 30 million people between now and 2030, aside over about 100 million people we have already in poverty bracket. It shows that some of the strategy deployed by government, some have worked and some have not. If you take job market, for instance, report shows that 400,000 people have been taken out of, have been gainfully engaged because that partnership was with National Bureau of Statistics. So reports, figures submitted to them show that about 400,000 people have been employed. On the other hand, 700,000 people lost their jobs. Approximately 4 million people are still looking for what to do, aside the unemployment figure that we had before. This tells us that with World Bank giving us warning, Moody's saying that, hey, Nigeria, you have left stable economy to negative as it were in terms of their rating. Nigeria need to do more, both the people and government, the center and subnational. We need to do more in order for us not to be caught up in the web of global economic quagmire, particularly if global oil prices goes to $50 per barrel. World Bank is saying Nigeria may just be back in another recession. Why? Because revenue seems to be dwindling in terms of internally generated revenue for subnational, and federal government need to do more in generating revenue, which seems right now to be unsustainable.
Okay, now let's talk about some of the conditions to be on the path of recovery, like the World Bank has also stated. It says that, well, we have to remove fuel subsidy and increase our domestic revenue. They've also made mention of removing trade tensions, restrictions, and also improve on our predictability of the economy. In the short term, do you think we can achieve all of this? You've already rightly said, yes, the volatility of the oil prices is still a reality to be faced, but we still have Brent selling for $62. But removing fuel subsidies, is that a possibility anytime soon?
Yeah, first subsidy conversation is more political than economic, than the economics of it. The truth is that rather than subsidizing the poor, what happens is we subsidize the rich. Anywhere in the world, most places in the world, what we spend today, it seems to be relatively higher. What we spend today seems to be relatively low to buy fuel compared to what happens in other environments in the world. But the question Nigeria will say is that this perhaps is the only security we have when it comes to what government is giving back to us, because most of the road apart from FCT and few other places are really bad. I give you an instance. You are in Lagos, I'm in Abuja. Lagos is a big city. But when it comes to functionality, it's a bit dysfunctional because I don't know how many hours you spend a day before you get to work today. And a lot of people are talking about that. And in an environment where there are not so much traffic, power is not just there for them. When there is power, health system is not just there for them. Where there is health, you have to struggle with education. So we have one issue or the other from one state to the other. Removing subsidy, however, if government will guarantee direct investment in capital expenditure, which can replace the burden that the burden that will come on them, because right now they will use part of the money saved on recurrent on their purchase of PMS, maybe to pay their hospital bills, maybe to eat, etc., etc. So what I expect government to do is, what are the assurances so that we don't repeat what happened in 2012 and part of what happened even in this administration, which is we had increased prices before we start planning palliative measure. What palliative measure do we want to put in place? Today is the best time to start planning that, so that you don't cushion effect of people that have already fallen from 10-story building and now want to look for foam when the back is already on the ground to say you want to cushion it. So my argument or my advice strongly will be that it is good to remove fuel subsidy that go up whopping over 1 trillion naira from our budget every year because we want people to drive their vehicle. Perhaps if we just make parks available more, the demand for our product, our PMS, will reduce because people will not need to depend on their diesel and generator becoming independent power generating plants for different homes and also for factory and industry. People will now have to use and of course pay more for power. So that is the argument regarding power supply. But beyond all of that, Nigerian government needs to be very heavy on reform this time, from manufacturing to textiles to construction, to bringing more people, the innovation we have regarding Dangote, among others, coming to invest directly in infrastructure while they take tax credit in return. We might even do equity financing, saying private sector invest in some facility or infrastructure that will generate revenue back to them in near future. I think if we do this, it will give us more opportunity and more window for us not to go back into recession. But if most of these things are not done, I'm afraid, recession might just be staring us on our faces.
Okay, Paul, let's also talk about the World Bank's issue being raised where they say we have to be able to ensure that we have predictability, improve on our predictability of our economy. In your own assessment, what do you think this really means? We have a GDP growth rate of about 2.1%. We have a population growth rate of no less than 2.6%. How do we now marry this reality and then drive ourselves on a policy growth that would give us predictability of the economy?
Now, the visibility right now, like you mentioned, is 2.1, and it's not even going to end there. Projection for Nigeria in 2020 and 2021 remains 2.1. Population growth rate will not stop, average of about 2.6 or 2.7%, approximately 0.5% of shortage between population growth rate and economic growth rate. Population growth rate is not bad in itself because many countries in the world actually want to go above 2%, not more than 2.5%, which is what guarantees future for them. Japan is trying to increase population growth rate because they have economic growth rate, how do we marry that? So the natural growth rate seems to be there for population. However, when it comes to economy, how productive is our economy? So for me, it is to get our economy become more productive. And in making it productive, it has to be investing in capital expenditure. That is the same thing a World Bank has called reform. It's the same thing IMF have called structural transformation. It is the same thing we are saying we need to have a national development plan. We cannot have out of 36 states plus FCT, only 11 of them are financially viable. What happens to the remaining of 11 of 36? You have 11 viable. Clearly, even if federal government says he has big shoulder and he wants to shoulder everything, I am afraid he may not see solution in view. So to get solution, we need to start looking at what some of these international and local organizations are saying regarding our economy. So that on one hand, we will not be trying to build economy. On the other hand, there are so many leakages that is not making some of our policies to come out well the way we want them today.
Now, talking about increased lending to targeted sectors, this is no more news, but the how is the question now. How do we drive funding to the real sector? Yes, we see our banks faring better, and non-performing loans have also dropped to 6.6% from about 14%. World Bank, Moody's also applauds that. But on the part of lending, how do we increase lending to the real sector and have more financial inclusion?
Thank you so very much. What is real sector and what is unreal? Before now, we see a lot of lending happening in non-real sector, but what drives economy is real sector. Those who are doing businesses that maybe you can see, and some of them that are non-Nigerians that come to Nigeria to invest in Nigerian economy. So in lending to them, we mean that employment will expand. It will mean that poverty will shrink. It might have implication directly if there are no additional output on inflation. But if the output in production meet up with supply of money, definitely it will balance out and you don't have so much effect on that. So lending to real sector, we also have implication on what MPC fixes NPR in the long run. So this is it. When you have an economy on one side that is not attracting foreign investors enough to the country because the rates are poor and because of instability on one hand, you also have an economy that wants to help the real sector. by reducing interest rate. So monetary authority, the goal for monetary authority is exchange rate stability, which will mean that more money Nigerians have to attract, Naira has to be attracted to more people. That is, people wants to invest in Nigeria for Naira to be stronger economy. That's on one hand. On the other hand, they also need to ensure that there is stability in price, which means we don't have high inflation. But you now need fiscal authority to now battle with how do we actually build this economy for people to come and invest in it. Now, the middle guys in all of these are commercial banks and other financial institutions who are the real lender to the public. Because the risks are high in lending to people, CBN have made federal policy: if you don't lend up to 60% of your cash reserve requirement, you are going to be penalized. So many policy. Even at that, we still don't have so much going to private sector. The reason is because there is no proper risk measurement. I don't know, and many Nigerians will say they don't know what their risk rate is. Before you lend in other environments, you first know your credit rating. So credit rating, we have about 2 or 3 of them in Nigeria. They are not as popular as we should know them. I don't know the partnership they have with federal government agencies, which I think this credit organization can have, credit bureau organization can have with agencies of government for those who are doing business. And what is it that they can have? In Nigeria today, you still want people to bring CFO, that before you get governor's consent, you need to go to several mountains to pray. So what people have are not things that is acceptable by many financial institutions. So the rate is not the real problem. The real problem is accessibility. How do people access facility from financial institutions? An industry that has billions of naira in it, and government is not even aware of some of this industry. They are still categorized as informal sector. Meanwhile, what they have, a structure could worth about 40-50 million naira, but it's not accessible by commercial bank today because it is not in what they were taught in schools, or is not acceptable by rules given to them by the Apex Bank. I think we need to look at our economy very well and see uniqueness of our people, uniqueness of our businesses. In comparing ourselves with the rest of the world, we also copy some of the things that they've done so that people can borrow with his Rolex wristwatch. Not just that, he must look for a property from his great-grandfather who never did proper documentation. That will make it very unattractive for people to borrow money. So for me, I think since we don't have proper documentation in the country regarding getting land and so on and so forth, and if you check ease of doing business, Nigeria still score really low in those areas. Meanwhile, those who seems to have been able to get money from the bank are responsible for why ease of getting credit is so high. Because if you check ease of doing business, one of the areas we score really high over the years has been ease of credit. But when you look at the economy and you look at those who are in the informal sector or small-scale businesses or medium-sized businesses, they still find it very challenging to access credit. So to start to get credit today, we need to rework the entire value chain of businesses to getting credit and ability to pay back. If not, federal government will keep collecting loans. We'll be able to pay back because we can throw sovereign guarantee on all of that. But it will not be the same for small businesses because what they have, the ability to pay and the energy to pay, in fact, to access facility, it's a big issue even as we speak today in Nigeria.
Well noted, Paul. But now, before I let you go, one of the other highlights we have here is increasing our domestic revenue base. Yes, we understand our tax base, especially within the informal sector, is still very low, but we see an aggressive approach from the government at this point in time. But really now, to what extent do you think we can reduce our borrowing? Because over the years, just take 2019, for example, we've had a whole lot of borrowings. We look at our capital and recurrent expenditure as well too. The ratio is not balanced as well. We have had warnings from the IMF as well saying that, well, Nigeria has a debt crisis. The federal government as well, it's not debt crisis, it's revenue generation situation problem that we have. How do we get to come out of this situation and be on the path of growth back again when it comes to revenue generation? Talk 2020.
Well, recently we saw what Presidency has sent to National Assembly regarding getting more loans, as against about 25 trillion naira we have already in debt. and servicing is responsible for, I think, more than 20-30%, or almost at par with what capital expenditure is. And this, of course, it is disincentive to capital expenditure. Let me give you the spending ratio between recurrent expenditure and capital expenditure. 2019, we had, and 2018, we had approximately 30% going to capital expenditure. In 2020, that will reduce to about 20% because we have more to spend in current expenditure because of minimum wage projection. So we have 20% left. If you collect more money, you have what is not going to impact directly on our economy because it's going to be taken away by some foreign, some local, those who have given money to government in order to do the business of government. So this is the issue. Generating more revenue, we need to empower people in order for them to give more. FIRS, we need to expand tax bracket for more people to get in tax bracket while we still maintain the same rate. Good enough, Finance Act is being reviewed and passed to law, and I hope that very soon, some implementation that will not have so much burden on people will take place.
Thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, Paul Alaje, Senior Economist at SBN Professionals. Thank you very much for your time.